If you're thinking about renovating your patio and you want to add a personal touch, there's no better way than by DIYing your own interlocking concrete pavers. And in this video, I'm going to show you just how simple that process can be. Hi, I'm Cool Hand Robin, and I built a small business out of making concrete crafts. To make the pavers, I'm going to use these reusable plastic molds. You can find them on Amazon. I will link them down below if you want to check them out. The inspiration for this design came from nature. Right here in Florida, we have a lot of water, a lot of ocean, and this pattern right here is called fish scale, but to me it also kind of looks like waves coming out of the ocean. So the color is also inspired by the beach. So let's take you through the process. To make these pavers, we are going to use 5 ingredients: Portland cement, sand, gravel, pigment, and water. Since I am going to be adding color to these pavers, I will be using white Portland cement. If gray is what you have available, you can also use that as well. The Portland cement acts as a glue that is going to hold everything together. The next ingredient is sand, and I'm just using regular play sand, and that acts as an aggregate and strengthens the mix. Third ingredient is gravel, and I'm using pea-sized gravel because the pavers are going to be a little bit on the smaller side. And gravel is an economical way of adding volume and strength to your pavers. All right, now let's talk about pigments. Pigments are one way you can add color to your concrete pavers. The benefits of using pigments as opposed to a stain or a paint is that the color goes all the way through. So if something happens and your pavers chip or scuff, you're not going to lose that color. The pigments that I'm using are UV and fade resistant. And our last ingredient is water, and water is perhaps the second most important ingredient because it kicks off the chemical reaction that glues everything together. But the key is you don't want to use too much water because that will weaken your pavers, and you don't want to use too little water because that is going to make it very difficult to work with your mix. So the key is to get it just right. The ratio I will be using to make these pavers is 1:2. That's 1 part cement, 2 parts sand, and 2 parts gravel. This allows for an easy to work with mix that hides the look of gravel in your finished product. Now, when it comes to adding water, the ideal ratio is 1 part water. However, many factors can affect how much water you add to your mix. Things such as the wetness of your sand, humidity in the air, if you washed your bucket prior to using it, all of that residual water is going to affect your ratios, and it is much easier to add water than to take it out. This is the sand that I use. It's quickcrete play sand. Sometimes it comes in bone dry, sometimes it comes in soaking wet. And that amount of wetness is really going to mess with you when you're mixing everything together and adding your water. So that's why I always start with half a part of water, and then I can always add more. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put on my gloves and my respirator. When working with Portland cement or any type of cement, you do want to protect your lungs by wearing a particular respirator. So once I have my cement and sand measured out, that's when I add the water. And before adding my water, I'm going to mix in my pigment. When using your pigments, you always want to read the instructions. This one is a powdered pigment. It's synthetic, and the max load rate is 4.5%, which means that if I have 1,000 grams of cement in there, I can only use about 4.5 grams of pigment. However, I'm going for that nice pastel look, so I'm only going to use about 5 grams. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of blue for fun. All right, we're going to add You want to stir everything together. Just pour it in. If you have a corded drill, it makes this so much easier than mixing it by hand. And I like to get it to this nice workable consistency. So as you can see, like if I were to pile it into one area, it would hold shape. Okay, so this is kind of the consistency that you're looking for. You see how it holds shape. I like getting my consistency and hydration right before adding the gravel, because once you add the gravel, it changes the texture of the mix, and it's really hard to tell how workable it's going to be until it's too late and you're already putting it in the molds. Now, I already applied a mold release to these molds, but if yours are brand new, make sure to oil them up, grease them up, or to apply a mold release spray. Now, you can actually use this mold directly in an area where you're building your patio. However, you have to be on your knees this whole time, and if you have problematic knees, it's much better to make them in one space and then move them over. Just slap it in there. These are some gourmet artisanal pavers, I'll tell you that much. Okay, so once your molds are full, that's when the fun part begins. Now, obviously, if you're not a perfectionist, you can kind of leave it as this, smooth it down and call it a day, but I like to put a little personal touch to it. And I'm scooping any excess off the top. As you can see by me going over it with a trowel, it pushes the gravel underneath and creates a smooth and even surface. So after I fill the molds, I let them sit for about 15 minutes to half an hour before unmolding. So another reason that I wanted to make these on this table instead of directly on the ground is that it gives me a little bit of more control when it comes to the final finish. When they're on a table like this, I can use a concrete vibrator to shake all the air bubbles out and in turn create a really nice smooth finish. I tried several different attempts until I finally reached a finish that I was satisfied with. One of the attempts I used a concrete vibrator to kind of get that smooth finish, and another one I used a mist of water to kind of smooth out any edges, and that looked nice when it was wet, although when it dried it kind of created this really gritty sandy look, which I did not really care for. And finally I decided that the best finish is achieved when you let the concrete set for about an hour and then you go in with a trowel and just kind of smooth out any rough bits. And it doesn't have to be perfect because any imperfection actually adds to the whimsy and the patina of the finished product. And remember folks, done is better than perfect. If you wanted it to look professional, you would have hired a professional, but we're going for that whimsy, one of a kind, very creative look. Now, if I want to get really creative, I can go around and kind of flatten out the edges. I think that looks really nice. It gives it a three-dimensional look. After about 12 to 24 hours, depending on the outside temperature, the pavers are set and dry, and then I just split them apart, sand off any rough edges, and lay them out. Now there's one last step before they are installed, and that would be to seal them. If you want to see me try out different sealants and compare what they look like side by side, make sure you're subscribed because that video is coming in the future. I'm also going to be doing an installation video. If you want to see that, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you are notified. But hopefully this was an informative video on how to make a concrete mix for your pavers. If you have any questions, drop them down below, and happy crafting!